So, welcome. When we finished our last panel, I asked the chief of staff and the council member, each of them had been in community organizing and are now in government. And I asked them how it looked, what looked different from the inside than the outside. Mr. Beutner, you've done a lot of things in your life in the public sector, in the private sector, in the ink stain wretch sector of newspapers, but you had not been an educator. What do you think, now looking at the system from the inside, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions people have about it, viewing it from the outside?
We got a couple days for this?
Yeah.
I'd say the biggest challenge we have inside versus outside is reminding people that everyone in the community has a stake in public education. Maybe my windshield survey, Moctesuma's, might be different in that my journey has been built on public education, so I came to this role understanding the importance of it. And I'd say the greatest learning connecting to a community like or this audience is we all have a stake in public education. And I'm not so sure the community of Los Angeles would hold that high enough in their set of values.
Mr. Esparza, you've had a very successful career in the film industry, but then you created a charter school. What has surprised you most being involved at that intimate level in what it takes to produce quality outcomes in education?
I'm shocked that the focus is not on students. The focus is on everything but students. So all of the institutions, all of the stakeholders carve out their turf in reference to their interest, not the student interest as the first priority. That's what's shocking to me.
Yeah, and when you say all the stakeholders, who are you talking about?
I'm talking about the unions, the administrators, the elected officials.
Yeah. What would a system that prioritized student interest more, what would be the biggest difference between that and what we see now?
Well, it would be a commitment to the students in reference to time, right? Children have vanishing time, right? You either educate them while you have them, because if you don't in those 6, 12 years that you have them, their lives are altered forever. And people don't appreciate that time is precious for a child.
Yeah. So when you, Mr. Beutner, so 640,000 students, is that right?
Yeah.
Roughly.
Roughly.
80% qualify for free or reduced price lunch. It has to be one of the highest shares in the country. When you look at those, the challenges, the challenges of economic segregation and racial segregation that are significant in the LA public schools and are in other major cities, what seems to you, now that you have some time there, what seems to you the most important things to do to overcome that level of economic and racial segregation?
Sure. Let me just touch on two things, perhaps. The first is we inherit a system that was designed where the center was in charge. 700 square miles, serving the needs of a population of about 5 million people. One size fits all, which it doesn't. So we're doing everything we can to restore the school as the center of our work. That's where decisions are best made, and to connect the community to that school. That we think will accelerate progress for all of our students because the needs in Boyle Heights are very different than the needs in Chatsworth. So allow our educators in schools to have greater voice, allow our families to have greater voice in how schools are run and what happens in schools. The second, it ties back to the comment I made earlier, which is public education is being starved of resource. So we're here in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, we have about $17,000 a year to invest in each student. If we were having the same conversation in New York, it'd be $29,000. Now, $29,000 and $17,000 are just numbers on a page, but let me put that in human context. Over the course of a K-12 journey for one student, that means we could provide for each student in second grade their own reading teacher and their own teaching assistant. So we would no longer have the conversation about whether every student graduates proficient, prepared for college, career, and life, if we could do that. So some of the symptoms we see are fundamentally a symptom of inadequacy, and how California could have gone in a generation from fully funded on par with New York or Boston or DC, wherever we want to choose, to being so dramatically different And those symptoms we see in everything we try to do in school.
I want to come back to the financing in one moment. We'll talk about it at length. But I just want to kind of clarify this point. You said in an interview in 2018 you thought it was more important to try to improve the quality of instruction in a school than to look for policies that would change the racial and economic makeup of the schools. Is that still your view? Or do you think you need to do more to break down some of the economic and racial segregation that is apparent in the schools?
So we're segregated as a society. We serve 85+% kids living in poverty, 85% plus kids of color. We are segregated. We're segregated from the rest of Los Angeles. So our challenge is actually to address the needs of our students. I just came from a school this morning, back to the issue of adequacy, about 1,200 students, 90 plus are receiving some form of counseling. 20 have had some form of suicidal ideation where the clinical intervention was needed. Yet within our scope of resources, we can't address all of those needs. So if we're serving a community or a population with high needs, we have to look that square on. And that manifests itself in all kinds of things, but to define it solely by race, when we're not dealing with the issues of counseling and support that's needed in schools, we're trying to address the issue of over-identification of students for arrest or diversion instead. We're trying to make sure that we have educators who are culturally compatible with the community they serve, want to be in schools, serving high-need schools. We have a host of things we're doing, but if we're ultimately, our population are kids of color, we have to better serve them.
Your charter, the LA Academy of Arts and Enterprise Charter, tell me a little bit about who you serve and what you do that's different than a traditional public school.
We have about 300 students. We're in downtown. Most of our students are undocumented or come from families that are immigrant families. 98% qualify for reduced or free lunch. About 90% were English learners at one point or still are. And every day we have an incident where a child needs counseling, some sort of intervention every day, or have had some event in their family, in their home, that causes a crisis for them. So we have 4 counselors full-time for those 300 students. And so we have reorganized our budget, and we only get about $10,000, $11,000 per child. We don't get the 17, in order to focus on that. And as a consequence, our students take much longer to graduate because they come here not speaking English. Many of them come here to our school not speaking Spanish, speaking an indigenous language from Central America. And so when you look at our graduation rate, some of the students take up to another year or two, and then our graduation rate is 83%, right? So we're looking at what can we do to encourage these students and give them what they need where they are.
The future of charter schools, Mr. Beutner, like Mr. Esparza, the future of charter schools is obviously a central issue or not maybe not a central issue, but it's an issue in the teacher strike. The school board voted earlier this year to support a moratorium, at least temporarily, on charter schools. LA has one of the biggest shares of its students in the country in charter schools compared to other school districts. What is, in your mind, what is the future role of charter schools in educating the kids in LA? Do you expect the share of students to go up? Do you want it to go up? Should it go down? Do you want it to go down? Or is it Goldilocks just right at this point?
If it were just right, I think we probably wouldn't be having this conversation in everything we do in public education. But maybe we're having the wrong conversation about the governance model, because if we went to a school, whether it's Moctesuma School or another school, we'd be looking for great instruction happening in the classroom. We'd be looking for the whole child to be supported, their social and emotional needs, be looking for a strong connection to the family and the community we serve. And I think we'd all agree that's the recipe. That's a recipe for success, irrespective of the governance model. So I think for too long we've had the conversation in Los Angeles about the governance model and not about are the components that we want to see of what a quality education looks like happening in each of our schools, whether it's a traditional school or a charter school. And as we become more transparent, we just announced this week, we're sharing more information about what's happening in each of our schools as a way for our educators to understand how do we intervene, how do we do things differently to try to make progress. But if we spend another decade talking about charter or no charter, I think we're missing the bigger picture, which is every school, irrespective of its governance model, has to provide for great teaching in the classroom, strong school leadership connected to the families and student it serves with all the social and emotional support they need.
But the charter, go ahead.
No, I was about to say that why I was moved to be part of a committee that would create a charter was because from my childhood, I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to LAUSD schools. And 50 years ago, I was indicted by the Los Angeles grand jury for having been one of the organizers of East LA walkouts. I'm one of the East LA 13. And we saw then that the school district and the police department and the city fathers and mothers really did not care about whether or not Latino kids on the east side were going to get an education. And so we created a social movement. And that resulted in me getting indicted a second time. All right, I was one of the Biltmore 6. I'm one of the only few people, right, who has been indicted by the grand jury twice, secret grand jury indictments, who has managed to survive. Right? Because most of my other fellow organizers back then, their lives were destroyed. And mine almost got destroyed. So, but as I exited that and I created a career and I became a well-respected Hollywood movie producer, I continued to be involved in schools and to see what was going on. And about 15 years ago, I went to Wilson High School to go give a talk, and I spent a day there. And I discovered that the social attitudes and views about Latino kids had not changed at that point in 35 years. And my sense is that it's just barely beginning to change, right? What people don't talk about is that Latinos are more than 50%. What is it, 70% of the LAUSD?
A little north of that.
Yeah, a little north of 70%, and that's not taking into consideration the dropout rate. Because if the kids didn't drop out, we'd probably be closer to 80%. Right? And we're nowhere near that in reference to teachers, administrators, elected officials. The people in this room do not represent Los Angeles in terms of what the population is.
So in your view, do you think, are charters necessary to, in essence, create more local control? I mean, they obviously a big point of debate. They have become a point of debate even at the presidential level. We hear some of the Democrats who had earlier supported them now saying they should be rolled back. Do you think there needs to be more charters? Is the union right? Do we need fewer charters? What would you say?
I'm not for charters or against public education. Charter schools are public schools. They're financed by the taxpayers. I'm for students. I want whatever it is that's going to work to educate students. And charters are playing a role right now by creating a conversation that is uncomfortable and that is focusing on that there are other ways that we can have results that are serving students. So if charters disappear from my point of view 20 years from now because we have an extraordinary school system that serves students, I will not mourn it.
Mr. Beutner,
I'm not for charters, I'm for students.
Mr. Beutner, you talked about the need for financing. Talked about the need for more money. Measure EE last year, $500 million a year. Voters rejected it. Only got to about 45%, I think. Are you going to try again?
We have to. We have to. I think it's an imperative because if we cannot connect the community back to the schools which serve the community, our future elected officials, our future teachers, our future journalists are all going to come from public education in Los Angeles. And we either choose to invest in children and their future or not. So I think we have to.
So what's an alternative? Is there a plan of what to do and when?
So I think stay tuned. My guess is in this coming year, there'll be something on the ballot in California. Legislative leaders don't tend to take to voters increases in funding for things. It goes to the ballot. And I'd be surprised if there is not something on the ballot in 2020 to increase funding for public education.
So what are your options? March is the primary.
March primary, November general election. My guess is it'll be November.
It'll be November.
There have been discussions already about different types of initiatives. The question is always who pays and why should they pay? Measure EE to me was crystal clear. We chose to skew it towards those with more property. So as opposed to a parcel tax where a family in 1,100 square foot home or residence in South Los Angeles would pay the same as a building owner downtown, we didn't think that was fair. So we skewed towards per foot. Those with more feet pay more, those with less feet pay less. Unfortunately, those with more feet decided to protect their investment and campaign against it.
It was interesting because, often in many cities, as you know, the business community will be generally supportive of more spending on education, arguing that this is our pipeline to our future workforce. Did not happen here, right?
Right.
And
right.
the opposite happened.
The opposite happened, and again, I think it's because we tried to do something which we felt was fair to the community as a whole. But if you look at the economics, so if you own 1 million square feet a building, one of the big sky rises in Los Angeles, that's worth probably $1,000 a foot, if not more. So you have $1 billion asset, cash flowing $50 or $60 million. Okay, what you would have paid is $120,000.
Oh.
So you have $1 billion, you're making $60 million, and somehow you didn't think an investment of $120,000 in the future of the community made sense?
Mr. What did you make of that vote? In terms of what you were saying before about your sense that the lack of concern about educating a primarily Latino student body didn't look to you too much different today than 50 years ago. How did you interpret the vote not to provide the funds?
I'm also on the board of directors of the Latino Chamber of Commerce, and it came to us, and our board was split, but we ultimately supported, or we stayed out of it. I forget which it was. But I voted to support on that board.
But so among those, even in the Latino Chamber of Commerce, in a 75% roughly Latino school, so what was the argument against that the system?
The accountability for the use of the money. That was the primary tool that was used by those that were opposed and were lobbying us to deny it the support. Our position as a Latino Chamber of Commerce was, this is about our kids. We don't have any choice. We may not like the accountability provisions that are here, but we care about the kids. And ultimately, that's what was moving the majority of our board.
Yeah, and I think it's the right thing, but it would be naive to assume that all has gone well in public education the last decade or two in Los Angeles. But progress is being made. Just this past year, we had record high graduation rates. Scores in all the state tests increased. We had a record number of English learners become proficient in English, record low suspensions, but not fast enough. So the challenge is, how do we accelerate the pace of progress, and as a community come together to support that, not relitigate whatever might have happened 2 years ago or 20 years ago, because we can only go forward.
I believe the audience, you can ask questions on your Slido. If you have questions, we'll bring them up. Can I ask you about one? You noted that graduation rate is up to what, almost 80%, 78% now?
North of 80%.
North of 80%. But one number really jumped out at me. Only 9% of the ninth graders in the LA public schools will ultimately complete college.
It's about 12 will graduate in 6 years. Now,
what is that? Is that, do you believe that fall off is primarily something that happens in the post-secondary, or that they are not emerging from 12th grade with the skills and knowledge to be able to ultimately succeed in college?
It's an and. It's an and. So we have to better prepare students in their time with us, absolutely. And we have to better prepare them for connecting to college and staying in college, wherever college choice they make. But 12% completion, roughly the same level as those who drop out, that's not acceptable by any measure. And that's the opportunity. Now, having made progress on graduation means they're with us. That's good. So on that foundation, now we have to accelerate the pace of progress across the board.
I'm interested in your experience at the Charter. Do you know what share of your students go on to college and what experience they have once they get there?
We're documenting that right now. We've got about 60% that are going on to higher education. But many of them have a real crisis in their first year. Being away from home, the worries about debt. Most of our immigrant families don't want to have any debt. They're afraid of it. And so it is a problem in that the support system, particularly for the first year of college, is not there for these students.
You know, we only have a little time, so I want to, if I could, Mr. Esparza, ask you a broader question, because as you noted, you were part of the Chicano movement in LA in the late 60s and early 70s. If you look back now, 50 years on, in your view, has the Latino community in Southern California made more or less progress than you would have anticipated at that point?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
50 years is an interesting lens, right? It's a lifetime. And certainly, it's a different conversation today. I'm here sitting on this couch with the superintendent of schools, which I welcome and I support, and I have a constructive conversation that I know is focused on the welfare of children, and I welcome that. 50 years ago, I was in jail, so because that's what I was advocating. So yes, I think there's progress.
Good. All right. And as a final word for you, Mr. Question, do you think students today are facing similar issues as you did as a student protester?
Yes. Yes. My first year, right, so I was valedictorian in my high school, scored high on the SAT. I went to UCLA, 30,000 students. There were 40 Mexican-American students out of
40.
40. And I know because I counted and I found every single one of them. And then I organized them, and we created United Mexican-American Students, which became MECHA, right? So I was trained as an organizer. That is really who I am. And that first quarter that I was at UCLA from March 67 to June, I became an alcoholic. I was so alienated. I was binge drinking because I just had a culture shock going from Boyle Heights to Westwood. I might as well have been on the moon in terms of the culture shock that I experienced. And so I identify with the students that I have in our charter school because I know they're experiencing the same thing, only worse.
No.
Right?
Great.
Because as a Chicano, I'm an American citizen. Most of my students, they don't know if their parents are going to be home when they get home.
Well, a sober note on which to finish. Mr. Beutner, Mr. Esparza, thank you very much for joining us. Join me in thanking them. And we're going to bring on Judy Mom in a minute. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.